Greetings, Mavericks and new viewers. Tonight, direct and live from the Maverick News Network World Studios. This is Maverick News with Rick Walker.
Vladimir Putin is threatening to vaporize us. Me, you, everybody with nuclear weapons. Yeah. He's threatening to nuke us. On this, what is this? September 26th, 2024. Let me say this again. Vladimir Putin is threatening to vaporize you with nuclear weapons. Do you understand what I just said? He's threatening to nuke you, your family, your children, your house, your community, your entire country, wipe all humanity off the face of the planet with nuclear weapons. Are you getting it? One man threatening to use nuclear weapons. Again. I don't even know where to begin with this tonight. Vladimir Putin is threatening to kill you, your family, everyone you know, and wipe everything that your entire existence off the face of the planet with nuclear weapons. Let that sink in for a minute. Not Joe Biden, not Donald Trump, not Xi Jinping. Vladimir Putin. I'll be right back.
You know, someone very profoundly once said many years ago that if fascism ever comes to America, it'll come in the name of liberalism.
Well, I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the Founding Fathers. If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on Earth.
The entire world is watching.
Every dictator, every crazy dictator in the world is watching.
The world is watching. On TV, the entire world is watching. On social media.
But the entire world is watching, and yes, they are seeing what we have apparently bravely been willing to say that others are thinking.
Stand for freedom. Literally stand for freedom. Let's get this done. The entire world is watching.
We're at war with the most dangerous enemy that has ever faced mankind in his long climb from the swamp to the stars.
Maverick News. Maverick News. Maverick News.
Let me have more control of my own destiny.
The world is watching.
Okay. To help us try to make some sense out of this, I've asked Mike McCarrick to join us tonight. Welcome back, sir. Great to have you here.
Hey, thanks for having me back.
I can't believe I just opened the program with those words again. But I mean,
again, yes.
It seems like it carries more weight, and yet, he's like the little boy who cries wolf, right?
Yes.
So you don't know whether to take him seriously or not. And we get this escalation. He's got this giant propaganda machine cranked right up. So no matter what he does, he has these apologists who turn everything around, flip it upside down, and convince people with weak minds that it's all our fault, that he's doing these things and that he's making these threats. He gets missiles from Iran, and when we respond by providing weapons to Ukraine in response to that, it's all our fault. Everything's our fault, even when he threatens to nuke us. Again, like, we've got all this stuff going on. Zelensky in the United States this week, speaking at the UN General Assembly, meeting with Biden. He's going to meet with Trump on Friday. We've had these, since the last time you were on, we've had these indictments against Tenet Media. We've got U.S. intelligence exposing what is, it's a real thing, the Russian information machine, propaganda machine that is in play globally and especially in the U.S. and in Canada. It's a real thing. A lot of the people involved are unwitting. They don't know. It's not their fault necessarily, but they become integrated into it. And yet there's this this denial thing. It's like it doesn't exist. It's just us censoring everybody. No, it's a real thing. It's just that we don't know how to deal with it because it's all on a new scale. It's a new form of warfare, unprecedented. We've never had to deal with this through social media and artificial intelligence and all of these issues before. So I'm so glad you're here tonight, Mike, because I need some help from somebody to try to make sense of this and keep this also in some perspective, because I just finished watching a little bit of Alex Jones and he is scaring the snot out of everybody. Like,
isn't he bankrupt yet?
They're talking about Roger Stone buying InfoWars. I don't know what, for $1.95.
I don't think Roger Stone has any money either. Didn't he go to jail?
Yeah, it's just I don't know, man. So where do we begin with this? Is this? I guess the first thing is we need to stay calm. So I'm going to dial it down a little bit. Okay.
So one of the things that I think we need to remember is Putin is obviously not a good human being, but I know why my face looks weird. I've got a very bright iPad uplighting my face almost like it's Halloween. So Putin's obviously not a great guy. He has been upping his disinformation campaigns against Western nations since at least 2000. It kind of hit a new high gear in 2007, starting with the cyber attack against Estonia, and that was also the same year as his 2007 Munich speech, where one of those things is somebody tells you who they are, believe them. So he told us that he was going to, through force of arms or deception or lies or stealing, theft, bribery, extortion, coercion, however he could do it, he was going to restore the Soviet Empire. And he sees the fall of the Soviet Union as one of those horrific events. People in Poland and the Baltics and Romania and Ukraine and all sorts of other places would definitely disagree. Increasingly, that's also true in Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. We sometimes tend to forget that those are also former Soviet states that are their own nation. And Russia has been coercing to varying levels of success the last certainly 20 years. But it's important to remember who he is, but it's also important to remember who we are. We are not Putin. We don't take things through force of arms if we don't have to. The ideals of the United States and Canada and the NATO nations, they don't stand for that. That's not why we exist. That's not why we banded together. That's not why we call each other friends. the Russians have been trying to go after us through a disinformation campaign that can be summed up in various ways. The one that I found online that makes most sense to me is it goes by the acronym FUDD. So FUDD, you can feel free to laugh at the acronym. Certainly military people laugh at the acronyms. So, but what that stands for is fear, uncertainty, doubt, and despair. So they are trying to cause fear. They are trying to create uncertainty and doubt. And their goal is, through fear, uncertainty, and doubt, to generate despair. Because if you can make the people that you are trying to go after despair, that, to me, says that once somebody starts despairing, then they've lost hope. They might still go in opposition, but their heart's not in it. So despair is his goal, and that's what we, as free people, have to oppose. We don't want to live in a world controlled by Russia, because you and I experienced a very, very small part of that just a few weeks back, where we don't want to cause harm to an individual, but because of that, the coercive laws and rules and threats on his physical well-being and life means that we just couldn't talk about things. We literally could not talk about the Ukraine war or Russian censorship or the state of journalism or criticisms of how the Russian military has both operated criminally or failed to operate competently. Sometimes those two are the exact same thing. And we lived that, where we couldn't talk about that. You living in Canada, me in the United States, in free nations, who we have freedom of expression and freedom of political speech and all that, and we couldn't talk about it. And we self-censored out of fear for him. And the toxicity and the corrosiveness of that was on full display. There were no words said, but the message was deafening for the silence that was created. It was I'm going to quote a song because I'm a musician, but you listen to or watch the video of, there's a metal band called Disturbed that did this astonishing cover of Simon and Garfunkel's Sounds of Silence. And while the original song was about, I can't remember if it was Simon or Garfunkel, but one of them had a deaf friend. And so the original song was about that. But the cover that the metal band did was all about silence and people afraid to speak. And it was a terrifying dystopian video, but it's just an amazing cover of the song. It's some of the best music of it I've heard in a long time. But that is not where we want to be. I don't want to live in fear. I never want to live in fear. My first day in the military was September 11th, 2001. Not by choice. That was just coincidence. That was how it went between my audition and going through the recruiter and the medical clearances and all the rest of that. I even had to delay because I was on the American Wind Symphony tour. That's a civilian group for college students that I had already committed to before the military. So just by coincidence, but after that, it was one of those things. They were trying to make us fear, make us uncertain, make us doubt ourselves, and make us despair. The thing with journalists is another example of how they're toxic in ways that are just, you need to take it seriously. And you need to go after them. You need to push back. Because in the tenant media, and that wasn't all of it, there's they more recently, since tenant media and all those conservative podcasters that were either knowing dupes and shills for Russia, or they were useful idiots for Russia. And honestly, there's no way to soft sell that. I guess one of the guys, Tim Pool, was very popular. But if he didn't know he was getting paid by Russia, that means he didn't do his due diligence. So he has either that he was getting paid by Russia and knew that he was giving out talking points from war criminals. That's on one side. That was one possible reason for him to say what he did. The other side is that he was incompetent. He didn't do his due diligence. He didn't investigate the people that were giving him money. He didn't follow the rabbit chain. He didn't say, well, if they're asking me to say this, well, what else out there is saying this? Because it's not that hard. What he was saying, you can trace back. It was probably on Russia Today. It was probably on some sort of Kremlin mouthpiece. It was somebody saying it that you never wanted to be in the same camp as. So his choices, he was either a knowing shill for Russia or he was a useful idiot. So this sort of attack on journalism, because in the United States and Canada is very similar, we're free to say any damn fool thing. Sorry if I can't say that on your show. We're free to say any fool thing that comes into our head. That's freedom. The government cannot punish us for saying foolish things. Can't punish us for saying incorrect things within reason. So there's no right is limitless. So you can't threaten somebody's life. You can't slander somebody, but you can say foolish things, and you can say things that don't make sense. And there's no. Now the rest of us, just because the government cannot punish you doesn't mean that the rest of us cannot hold you to account. Words matter. What you say matters. The actions you say matter. The actions you do matter. Who you take money from matters. The work that you do, the work product of these journalists pushing Russian talking points, knowingly or not, matters. And freedom of expression means that these people can say what they want, but it also means that the rest of us are free to criticize them and free to hold them to account. And I'm dead serious. These famous people, Tucker Carlson's one of them. I don't know if you read the indictment, but there was a thing where I couldn't, sorry, it's been several weeks since I read the indictment, but there was an actual quoted conversation in the indictment where they were talking about Tucker's idiotic trip to Russia, where he was in that grocery store, like buying bread that was obviously like a touristy, like the richest people grocery store kind of a thing, and he was just a moron. And I'm watching it, I'm like, what? It was weirder than him tanning his testicles. It was just weird. And there was this quoted conversation in the indictment that they were like, yeah, they want me to push this, and they redacted the names, but it was obviously Tucker Carlson in Moscow. They were like, they want me to push this, but man, this seems really dumb. Is this a step too far? Should we be pushing this? And somebody else says, well, they're paying us to push it, so let's push it. And that was part of the indictment. It's just like, yeah. Even these people taking the money are like, this is dumb. And so you kind of have to wonder, I get it. You got to make a living. You got to put a roof over your head. And if you're a professional, sometimes the people that pay you, he who has the gold makes the rules. I get it. But there's also a certain thing about standards and credibility and professionalism and ethics. And one of the sinister things about this whole thing is that they're going after one of our cherished freedoms, and that is freedom of the press. So if these people were useful idiots, they didn't really do anything wrong. I mean, the public can hold them to account, but I don't think there's anything illegal there. It's not illegal to be stupid. If that were true, most of us would have been in court long before this, myself included. But you get what I'm saying here, is that they're really trying to undermine our strengths. And they're not being dumb about their fear, uncertainty, doubt, and despair campaign. They know that our strengths are also our weaknesses. And in a free society, people can say things, and that's just the way that we have to live. So one of the things that we have to respond, we can hold the useful idiots to account professionally and ethically. We can hold the knowing shills legally responsible, and there are some Americans facing legal challenges, legal indictments. Mainly the two American citizens that put together that Tenet Media as a shell company for Russia. But
I used to watch Tucker Carlson when he was on Fox, and I used to think he was okay. Then he started to get progressively weirder, talking about how we were going to run out of diesel fuel. It was like fear porn, constantly.
Well, and
then
he had a shtick. I don't know if you remember, but this was shortly before Tucker, or maybe it was either shortly or before or shortly after Tucker got fired from Fox, that Fox settled a lawsuit. I believe it was against Dominion Voting Systems. I might be wrong. I don't have my notes in front of me, but it was one of the things surrounding the slander and defamation, because journalists are not free to say anything. They can't slander and defame. There's certain, there's a gray area there, but Dominion rightfully said, look, you guys are doing real harm to us, American citizens who are trying to run a company and do a job well, and you're slandering us, and you're hurting our livelihood, and you're hurting our business. That settlement included Fox News, Tucker Carlson, Sean Hannity, and some of the rest. They admitted that a reasonable person would assume that what Fox News is saying is not true. Just so you know legally how that came out. Fox paid something like $750 million, because that's the level of damage. This was not this was not a court case. This was the settlement with Dominion to avoid the court case, because the court case would have been worse. And part of their settlement is they had to admit that they were lying through their teeth, and no reasonable person watching Fox News should believe them. Fox News had to say that, just so you know where these people are now.
Yeah, that what you're saying is true. It's all documented. It's absolutely true about them lying. Right? You're saying is true. I know, because it's documented, because of how that all went down. This week, I noticed Tucker Carlson speaking at an event. I don't recall where it was exactly. He said he was offended, I'm paraphrasing, because he saw, I believe, a politician signing a shell at a munitions factory in Pennsylvania.
Oh,
I believe.
yes, President Zelensky was signing it. Yeah.
He
was
right.
signing 155 millimeter artillery shells in one of the main munitions factories that the United States has been expanding. There's a big one in, that one was in Pennsylvania, I believe, Scranton.
Yes.
So if I am wrong, please call me out. Just, somewhere in Pennsylvania, I'd like to say Scranton. There's a big one near me in Carbondale, Illinois. There's one in Alabama, and I can't remember where. There's one in Texas, and again, I can't remember where other than the state. And there's more. Those are just the four that I'm aware of that have been greatly expanding in the last 2.5 years.
You know what? I was offended by Tucker Carlson. And like when he first started to talk about it, I wasn't offended until he got to the part where he said that those shells were being, he was signing a shell that was going to be used to kill Russian civilians. That's what Tucker Carlson said. Now,
is he aware of the range of artillery shells? I mean, so that doesn't even make sense if you're talking about the actual munitions. So there's all sorts of dumb wrapped up in that, because even Russia, there were cases where Russia was using tube artillery. Russia's uses 152 millimeters, so it's slightly different. Is very similar. 152 and 155 millimeter are not that different. So they're very, very similar. So they would use them. I believe there were times where their tube artillery could reach Kharkiv. I don't think it currently can. But even on the Russian side, where they're targeting civilians, tube artillery is not the common munition. I mean, that, so just on a basic, you don't understand what you're looking at kind of stupidity.
It's
Did
not,
I mention they need to be
yeah.
held to account for incompetence?
Yeah. Well, but you know, but this is the thing. This is why I was offended by what he said. He knows. He bloody well knows, but he said that because he wanted to frame the visit in a way that turns it into a war crime.
He was running an agenda, yeah.
Yeah. So
Which is funny because
it's just
I don't know if
blatant.
you've, I don't know how much you pay attention to the military, but naming a sword or signing a shell or it's very common. The Ukraine Defense Support, we are almost finished fixing a Humvee ambulance that we are going to ship to a frontline combat medic for combat evacuations of wounded. And yes, I guarantee if they run across a Russian wounded soldier, they will medevac them and give them treatment. That's just what good people do. And what we're doing is we're selling bits of the inside. You can't do it on the outside you want to keep it, the Red Cross has to be visible and the camo and the rest of it. But the inside of it, where the wounded are going to be treated and where the medics work, we're selling little bits, you know. It's as a fundraiser to defray the cost of fixing it up and shipping it over there. It was like, give us at least $50 and you can have your message on the inside of this. We'll paint it on or Sharpie it or somehow permanently do it.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
so
I'm
it's
afraid,
very common.
Yeah, I'm afraid to look in the chat, honestly, because I'm probably getting beat up. But, you know, I don't want to be saying these things, folks. I used to be a Tucker Carlson fan, but I hear what I hear, I see what I see, and I know what I know. And it's just blatantly obvious now. He's not even hiding it. He's just a mouthpiece for Russia.
Honestly,
That's all he is.
I'm going to show my age a little bit and a little bit of my nerdiness, but when Tucker was on CNN and he was across from, was it Paul Begala on Crossfire? It was a little bit of the political porn that led us to today's hyper partisan stuff, but it had some history. Like PBS NewsHour had, and they still to this day have a little thing where a conservative and a liberal will talk about the politics of the day. And so that one was at least interesting. And he obviously wasn't stupid, even though even back then he would say ridiculous things. But even back then he was kind of saying things for effect, not necessarily for information. Almost shock jockey, even though he was wearing a bow tie at the time. He was trying to pretend to be some Wall Street conservative or something. But it was at least interesting back then because I do watch things I disagree with. I read things I disagree with. I even watch Russia Today, thankfully subtitled by Julia Davis, if I'm remembering the name right. Hopefully I remembered that right. She's on Twitter. Julia Yaffe? I'll have to look that up. I'm so sorry. But she does this. That's one of her things is she puts subtitles on Russia Today so people that don't speak Russia can see what they're saying. Because Russia Today RT was officially, several years back, officially absorbed by the Russian government, and they are a Russian government mouthpiece. And so if the CIA, for instance, if the American government, something by like the CIA or the FBI or whatever, was going to give an announcement, I'd probably watch it and just to hear what they have to say. So the whole thing about listening to people you disagree with, I think, is important. And when you're talking about what war criminals are saying, that is a separate version of important. So it's important, I think, to do that. But I mean, Tucker's taken it so far. And I didn't mean to be a bash on Tucker, but he was rolled up in this Russian propaganda thing, and there's no mincing words. He was either a knowing shill or he was a useful idiot. And there's no other way to spin that.
The insidious nature of what the foreign information war, the insidious part of all this, the worst part of it is that it forces us to become the monster that we are fighting against. If you, by unleashing an army of disinformation or just an army of liars, basically, within our system,
well, and
it forces us, we don't know how to deal with that. It forces us to sort of almost become like censors, but like I just don't know.
So one of the things that I meant to say, and I'm sorry, I went off on tangents. I'm not as prepared tonight as I normally am, but the thing that we need to fight is that we do have values. Free journalism, free press is an important value. No matter how bad things get, we still need a free press. There's no way around that. It's one of the pillars. Sometimes in the United States, we have our three branches of government, right? So a lot of the times in discourse in the United States, they refer to the press as the fourth estate, meaning that we have the president, we have Congress, we have the judicial branch, but then we also have the journalists. And that's how highly valued free press is in the United States, is that we put them on that level, that it really is that important. And we need to protect that. That is one thing the FBI is doing. I don't know if people in Canada are aware, but the FBI has many tasks. For instance, if there's a kidnapping case, it's automatically FBI jurisdiction. But one of their prime reasons for existence is they are the prime counter-espionage police force inside the United States. So if there are foreign agents operating inside of the United States, it's the FBI's job to go after them. So the FBI is doing that, and in all sorts of ways, and they're trying to protect the press, because after the Tenet Media and the indictment of those two came out, a few weeks later, I don't know if you saw this, but the Department of Justice, they oversee the FBI. It's part of the executive branch under the president. So the president, Department of Justice, and the FBI is under the Department of Justice. The DOJ released a second indictment that was announcing that they had seized 32 web domains. And similar to the Tenet Media thing, where they were pretending to be an American company even though they were not, these were like pretending to be the Washington Post. So instead of WashingtonPost.com, it was like WashingtonPost.pm or some similar thing, but they would use Washington Post graphics and logos. These are trademarked and copyrighted. They would use the journalist names that work at the WAPO, the bylines. So speaking of slander and trademark infringement and going after the good name of one of the nation's major news outlets, the FBI is going after that because they were run by Russia. There's just no doubt. There was a foreign agent operating inside Russia. The weird thing is that Russia still has an embassy in the United States. There are consuls and ambassador, deputy ambassadors and staffers. I'm sure there's a military attaché. There's all sorts of people in the Russian embassy in the United States. And they might even have branch embassies because we're big. They are free to speak. They are free to give announcements. The dividing line here is people need to know where this is coming from. Is it an American journalist saying a foolish thing? Okay, they're free to do that. Is it Russia saying whatever Russia says? Okay, as long as we know that it's Russia saying that. But if Russia is trying to pretend to be an American journalist and co-opting American journalists and trying to corrode the establishment of the free press in the Western world, that's something else entirely. And yes, we need to go after that. So yes, we can realize this is sinister. We can realize they're going after some of it's both a strength and a weakness, and they're trying to exploit it. But we can't lose the confidence that this stuff is important, that Russia attacking the free press is bad. It's a real It's a real problem that we need to deal with, and we need to be confident enough in our own ideals to protect them. We need to understand that they are worth protecting. We cannot fall into fear, uncertainty, doubt, and despair. We cannot. And so strength of character, understanding that our integrity and our credibility is worth defending. These are important. They're important to remember in the modern world. And that's a lot more time than I intended to spend on that journalism thing, but it's important to put that out there, and it's important to understand the distinctions.
Especially now more than ever, because everything is escalating now. I would say that the Russian propaganda has turned some people's minds inside out so that they think that it's all our fault, this escalation that we're seeing. But when I step back and I look at it, I don't think so. It's not us.
I mean, the people talk about maybe Ukraine should accept a peace deal. Maybe they should give Russia the land that Russia conquered. And that's, I mean, maybe we should, let Russia have control of our press. That's basically what we're saying to Ukraine when we're telling them to give up the Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, because they still occupy part of Kherson, the south of the river, and Crimea. I mean, would we give up Florida? So it's just one of those things that you have to, at some point, realize where this is coming from. The United States did not invade Russia. Ukraine did not invade Russia. Where is this coming from? And it's important to understand that, yes, this actually could end quickly. There is one way this could end quickly. Russia could go home. If Russia withdrew their forces to inside Russia, this would end. We would probably still have war crimes investigations and all that, but that is not a shooting war. That is not 1,000 Russian soldiers dying every day. That's not Ukrainian civilians dying. That's not gigantic kiloton explosions northwest of Moscow. Did I send you that video? Of the ammunition dump?
Yes, the one that was blown up?
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
I showed it. I showed that, yeah.
Which is a little bit astonishing. But Ukraine's not giving up. I don't know if you read any of the follow-on news stories, but it wasn't just that big explosion video was one of their biggest ammunition depots and weapons processing facility. It was more than an ammo dump. And I don't know if you saw some of the follow-on, but Ukraine managed to hit them while there were trains there, delivery trains, and at least 4 trains got really roughed up. And that would be almost euphemistic in how how lightly I described the damage to those trains. And you talked about Iran being involved. It's judging by the explosions, there's a good chance that either the very large, 1,000-kilogram Russian glide bombs were there, or Kinzhal missiles, or some of the Ukrainian theater. Kinzhal is a theater ballistic missile, a TBM, in a similar class to ATACMS. The Iranians were sending TBMs to Russia, and we got because I identify with my friends in Ukraine. Ukraine really went hard after them and just wiped them out. It was that one and at least 2 other ammunition depots that Ukraine hit within a span of just a couple of days.
Yeah, I saw another one the next day, yeah.
And it wiped out at least 3 months of supply. And that is Russia going full tilt on their offensive towards Pokrovsk. They're making progress near Vuhledar as well, trying to fight back in Kursk. And all of that, Russia, I think, is fielding something like 500,000 troops right now in direct combat. That's a rough number. That's give or take a lot. It might be 650,000 wouldn't surprise me. 450,000 wouldn't surprise me. And it varies day to day anyway as things happen. But that many troops, 500,000 troops-ish, for 3 months. I don't know if you're aware of how many munitions you can shoot off, even just one person, in one day. But if you're talking about 500,000 soldiers and wiping out a 3-month supply, that's huge. Ukraine's not giving up. They're going after Russia, and they're not listening to Putin. They're not buying the Kremlin line. They know who started this, and they're trying to end it. And if they can end it by blowing up Russians' munitions and kiloton level explosions, the people that made Oppenheimer, I don't know if you're aware, but some of the explosions in that movie Oppenheimer were not CGI. They had set those up. Those were real explosions.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, because they wanted something more approaching the real thing. And I believe the makers of Oppenheimer would have been that were a little bit jealous on that video that I sent, because it was just astonishing. It measured at something like 3.2 on the Richter scale, as measured by scientific instruments in Sweden. And something like that is got to be in the 2 or 3 kiloton range. And if you're talking about how big that is, Hiroshima was 15 to 20 kilotons. And you're talking 2-3 kilotons, you're talking, that's huge. And the after actions are just, the after action satellite photos that I've seen are just astonishing. So anyway.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is why it makes sense to take the fight to your enemy, Ukraine, take it to Russia, inside Russia, because it gives them the opportunity to attack the source of the munitions rather than wait for them to be shot.
When you see a kiloton conventional explosion go up, how many munitions in that explosion? Now, there were some Russians killed because people working there and all that, people working at the munitions depot did lose their lives. But all of those things that just went up in these astonishing explosions will never be targeted at either Ukrainian soldiers or civilians. Those are munitions Russia cannot use to hit an apartment building or an electrical power plant. They're gone. And so 2 to 3 months, I don't know, that's a quarter of a year. So it's just an astonishing success on Ukraine's part. Just wanted to push good news, because that's one of the ways that you fight back against somebody trying to scare you is, look, I'm confident and we accomplished this, and it's important.
And I would say this is applying more pressure on Putin than people here in the West, and just, I think people in general maybe realize. As a result of all of this, I've noticed just even within the last week, I think it's one of Putin's top sort of information warfare propagandist guys.
Yeah, it was one of the guys that's on RT, and I don't know if D is in the chat. I can picture the guy in my head, and he's on RT and podcasts and radio inside Russia, something like 8 hours a day. I mean, he's a stupendous presence inside of Russia. And
he's one of the main guys, and he came right out and said that maybe it's time to remove their commander-in-chief.
Yeah,
commander
that was
of the
just,
forces.
2-3 days ago? It was sometime recently.
I wouldn't want to be in his shoes. Wouldn't want to be in his shoes, honestly. It's not good for your health to criticize Putin.
Well, people in Russia tend to fall out of 20-story buildings for it's an awfully common way to go out in Russia right now, is to fall out of a 20-story building.
When I saw that clip, my jaw dropped to the floor.
Will he be alive next week was the biggest question, yes.
Yeah, amazing. But it shows that there are people questioning everything going on. And
Knights Table 4 does not have... Sorry, I'm reading the comments. Maybe that's a mistake.
You're braver than I am.
Knights Table 4 evidently is not showing their name, but they're talking about Ukrainian propaganda is on full flow. So if you're thinking that facts and reality are Ukrainian propaganda, that means I might have scored a point. So thank you for complimenting me on my success. I don't know if you remember in pop culture references because we've all seen it, but the very first Avengers movie where Black Widow is tied to a chair, and ironically, it's a Russian general, and his henchmen beating her up and asking her questions, but they're admitting all sorts of things. So really, it's the other way around. That by her leading answers, she's getting more information out of them and so at the end of it, when she breaks out of her chair, because she was never incapable of doing that, she said, thank you for your cooperation. So when I say thank you for your cooperation to whatever Knights Table something or other, that's what I meant. So if I elicit that sort of response from a possible Russian troll, then I guess I'm doing my job.
I see the effects of the information war impacting even presidential candidates. RFK Jr., a couple of videos that he's come out with in the last couple of weeks.
I'm just going to have to warn you right now. Yeah. Ukraine Defense Support is a 501c3. We are nonpartisan. We exist only to help Ukraine. So if I do comment on the politics, I try not to. I have a lot of practice because in the Air Force, I couldn't be partisan as well. When you're in the Air Force, you work for every single voter. Every single American citizen is who you owe your allegiance to. And so you cannot be partisan when you're... So I'm used to it, but I might slip. But yes, Russian propaganda has entered the American political system. There are American politicians that are flat out pushing Russian propaganda. I can name one person, Elon Musk, very commonly puts out memes that people have done the research. They literally started in Moscow. That's where they came from. That was their first appearance online, and Elon Musk is sharing these. So speaking of useful idiots, I don't know if he's making money out of Russia. I don't know what his story is. I mean, he tried to make Twitter into X, and I'm pop culture reference king. You remember that movie Mean Girls from, I'd like to say, the late 90s, and there was a girl who was trying to make fetch the new catchphrase. And it was like, stop trying to make fetch a thing. So Elon Musk has been trying to rename things X for like 25 years. When he took over PayPal in the late 90s, he tried to rename it X, and people are like, no, that's stupid. So that's when I see Elon Musk renaming Twitter into X, I'm like, stop trying to make fetch a thing. It was stupid 25 years ago. It's not any better now. So I don't know if he's being a useful idiot to the Kremlin or not. I used to like Elon Musk, but then I realized he actually wasn't an engineer. And so the things that I was crediting him for, the astonishing tech in SpaceX, or Tesla, or PayPal, and now Twitter, they're not his. He was never an engineer. So the engineering brilliance, SpaceX is still one of my favorites. The engineering brilliance in SpaceX is not Elon Musk. And so we need to actually realize who he is. He is the front man, the confidence man, the money man, the publicity man. He was never the brains behind the success. Just so we're aware of who he is.
Well, I just bring them up because I also, in addition to taking note of politicians speaking, I've also been watching within the last week Professor John Mearsheimer again, who had heavy influence on me, especially during the early portion of the war, and his arguments about NATO pushing right up to Russia's border. And, I was buying into a lot of that. And additional comments within the past week with Professor Jeffrey Sachs from Columbia, who I really never paid much mind to until this week. And now I realize that he should probably not be trusted at all. He was on Tucker Carlson, and some of the comments that he made on that program, red flags went up, and then I started to dig into him more, only to realize that this is a guy who's really at the core, I think, of a lot of the pro-Russian narrative within the United States. And this is a guy who was working hand in glove with Gorbachev after the fall of the Soviet Union. He was involved with the economic shock therapy, which when I analyze it, because of the economic collapse of the Soviet Union, he advocated for, shock therapy, like just get it over with quickly, to basically tank the value of all the assets in the Soviet Union quickly. And people here in our community have been going on about U.S. corporations profiting from buying up land in Ukraine, which is not true. BlackRock, 30% of all the farmland sold. It's not true. There's legislation that prevents it in Ukraine. I've shown that here on the program. But my point is, Jeffrey Sachs, his policies resulted in exactly that, but for Russian oligarchs back after the fall of the Soviet Union. His policies tanked the value of all the Russian companies, and then they were sold off piecemeal for pennies on the dollar to rich Russian oligarchs who were allowed to borrow money from the Russian government at the time, the former Soviet government, in order to buy those assets up, and that enriched them at the expense of the people. That's what created the oligarchs that we have today. And that's Jeffrey Sachs, who's right now on basically, I would say, a Russian information campaign on various stops, making public appearances with Professor Mearsheimer, and was just on Tucker Carlson, flapping his gums over there too. And I hadn't really paid any attention to the guy until I started to listen to him on Tucker Carlson, and I was like, wait a minute, this isn't right.
Yeah, it doesn't add up. Yeah.
No, not at all. Then I started to dig into it further. And if you dig down further, and folks, I know a lot of you are upset or concerned about the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Guess who's behind all of that? Directly. Running the foundations and the organizations and working in the arms, the subsidiary organizations of the UN to create the whole SDG program. Jeffrey Sachs. So this is the guy that Tucker Carlson is supposed to be opposed to because he's a conservative, and yet he's the wokest, most progressive liberal you're going to find anywhere, spouting off about Putin and what a wonderful guy he is. That's the other thing. Mearsheimer and Sachs, not a word about any of the motivations behind what Russia might be doing, or Iran, or China. They don't hold them accountable for anything. Everything's all our fault. Every aspect of the conflict, whether it's Gaza or Ukraine, it's all the United States' fault. And it's just, it lacks credibility when there's no balance.
It's interesting you brought up Mikhail Gorbachev, that there was a whole thing. Fire hose of falsehood is one of the tactics Russia uses. They just throw out all of this garbage, and sometimes it's mutually contradictory. So it's like you can't counter each and every one, but some of them actually do need to be countered, like the idea that has spread in America and probably Canadian conservative circles is that there was some sort of agreement back in the 90s that NATO wouldn't expand eastward. Mikhail Gorbachev would have been the person to negotiate that because the dates cited and all that kind of stuff. He was still the leader of Russia at the time. Right. Mikhail Gorbachev said that there was zero truth to that. There was never an agreement with NATO. And if there was somebody that was in a position to know, you'd think it would be Gorbachev. So it's just the fire hood of falsehoods and like blame the people that aren't doing the attacking. So out of the, between NATO and Russia, which one of us has been invading nations in Europe? And it's not NATO.
Right.
So it's just one of these things where one of the common Russian tactics, because you can, the fire hose of falsehoods, but they tend to come in categories. And so you can kind of like silo them a little bit and counter, like changing history for one, trying to change history with the whole NATO agreed to not expand eastward. No, we didn't. So, and it's easily debunked. But yeah,
I've said it here. I've repeated that myself because I believed it. But I've also said that even if it was said, there was no formal agreement. Maybe,
point me to the treaty.
Right.
You know,
there isn't one. Yeah.
Even if there was a gentleman's agreement, the people involved said there wasn't. So, and there's the other side of this, that where Russia had its thumb on, several now free nations, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Ukraine, Romania, the Czech and Slovak republics, and more, for decades and decades. In some cases longer. So like Ukraine was free between, I believe, 1917 and 1921. You're going to have to, I'm not going to say those dates are entirely accurate, but after the Tsar was deposed and then killed, and then the Bolsheviks were trying to take over, but people don't realize that it wasn't, 1917, Tsar's gone, Soviet Union starts. It wasn't that way. There was a civil war inside of Russia, the whites were versus the reds. The reds were the Bolsheviks. And Ukraine was a battle zone for several years.
There was a war with Poland in there.
Yes, there were British troops trying to help Ukraine win its freedom at the time. I don't remember who else was involved, but it was the real deal. And so Ukraine has been fighting for its freedom for a full century. And they just as one of those examples, but all of these nations that had lived under Russian or Soviet and then Russian again oppression for decades, why are they wanting to forge ties with the West? Why did they apply for NATO membership and succeed? And we can talk about what that actually means, because that's not a simple thing. It is not even close to a simple thing to be accepted into NATO. They have to do some serious work. It's an effort. It's a multi-year effort. It involves money and reforms and all sorts of stuff. Why did they go through all of that? So when you're talking about where did this all come from, there's a reason why all of those nations said we want nothing to do with Russia, and further, we want protection from Russia. So ask yourself why these nations, and if it was just like one nation, I would say, well, maybe it's a one-off, but it's nation after nation after nation after nation. And even Belarus in its state right now, I don't know if you realize, but as recently as 2015, and 2016 even, now that I'm thinking about it, they were making overtures trying to reform their legal system out of the oligarch, basically mafia rule, criminal rule, trying to achieve Western standards on their legal system and open up economic doors. And Russia shut that down. And if there is one hostage situation in Europe right now, it's Belarus. So when you talk about the one-off, now it's Belarus. And I feel sorry for him. I meant to mention this in John Johnson maybe in the comment section asked how many Russian POWs in Ukrainian captivity have chosen not to return to Russia. The answer is many. I don't have a hard number for you, but they exist because life inside the Russian military is brutal, sadistic even. There are drone videos of commanders beating their soldiers. I don't know if you are aware, another pop culture reference because it was actually on film and it'll give you a visual. Does anyone remember the Jude Law, Ed Harris movie Enemy at the Gates? Rachel Weisz was in it. Good movie. It was about Stalingrad, snipers. How historically accurate is a separate question, but it was an incredibly well done movie. One of the historically accurate things was that Russia was pouring unarmed troops, like they would cross the river and one soldier was given a rifle, the next soldier was given the ammunition, so that they had to work together, but they didn't have enough rifles for everybody. And then they were thrown into this meat wave assault. And then after these halfway armed raw recruits were thrown into the battle and told to charge, the Soviets would set up machine guns pointing so that if any of those troops, Russian troops, tried to retreat, the Soviets would shoot them. And these are called control troops. And that is still occurring inside of Ukraine. So that when they do go on these meat wave assaults that the Russian soldiers know they don't have much of a chance of surviving, if they try to refuse, they get shot, they get beaten, they get starved to death, they get staked out for the bugs and the animals. Life in the Russian military is brutal, sadistic. It's just, there's no way to sugarcoat that. And so when Russians are captured by the Ukrainians and they're treated well, they're given food, cigarettes, a decent place to sleep, medical attention. I don't know if people are aware, but there are at least 10,000 Russians that form the Russian brigades in the Ukrainian army. So there are many, 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 many Russians fighting for Ukraine. I don't know how many people actually realize that.
So Salty Fletch says, I'd say Putin has shown extreme restraint, Rick, since 2014. Maybe these psychos in NATO could back the F off. What are we going to gain? And I could respond to that, but maybe I'll just leave it to you, Mike. Do you want to comment at all?
Well, gain is a weird term. I like how these people have these handles because they're not afraid to use their names. My name is Mike Pekaric. If you have the courage of your convictions, I'm just going to say that too. Either you're a Russian troll or you lack the courage of your convictions. Put your name to your words. In a lighter note, I'm not one of those cowards that doesn't intend his puns. I fully intend my puns. Again, when you're talking about NATO attacking or Russia attacking, which one of those attacked? And it's not NATO. We're not going after Russia. We're protecting what we have. In like the journalism thing, when we're taking down a Russian shell company or Russian internet domains run by the Kremlin inside the United States, we're protecting our freedom of press because we want, the Washington Post was just one example, but there are others. We want the journalists inside the United States to be able to work freely without manipulation by outside forces. And if Russia wants to say something in the United States, well, say that you're Russia saying this, you know. It's the honesty and the ethics and the integrity that we're trying to protect our own ideals right now. And when you're talking about NATO, I don't know, I believe I've gone a little briefly over the history of NATO on your channel before, but it was born out of World War II, where the Allies at the time, it was mainly the Brits and the United States, and at the time the Brits were still the British Empire, so I forgot when the Commonwealth thing happened, but the Brits at the time included Canada, for instance, and so it was mainly English speaking was the start, and then heavy doses of Polish refugees. I don't know if people realize that the Battle of Britain, the famous Battle of Britain, there were several squadrons of Hurricane and Spitfires that were entirely operated by Polish pilots and ground crew that had fled Poland when Poland went under both the Nazis and the Soviets. I will remind people that the Soviets helped the Nazis carve up Poland in 1939, just in case you forgot. Mm-hmm. Just as a showing their true colors, and this is what Putin thinks was great. Let's go back to the Soviet days where they carved up Poland with the Nazis, because that was awesome. We saw how that turned out. Oswiecim, the Polish town of Oswiecim, just look that one up every once in a while to see what the Soviets and So NATO was born out of that, and the Allies had to learn how to cooperate, because you've got the American military that does things the way that we do it. We've got the Brits that do the things the way they do it. And even at the time, the Canadians had their own flair. The Belgians had their own thing. The French had their own thing, because we had significant Free French forces that mainly used American equipment, like a French tank column would use the American Sherman tanks at the time. So that's where NATO started, is the Allies defeating the Nazis had to learn how to work together. And that's where we started. We were liberating France and the Low Countries from oppression and defeating Germany. But that's our history, is liberation. But then what did we do with Germany? People that know their history. We rebuilt them. We had to control them for a little bit, because they were a train wreck. We had completely demolished them. But once we rebuilt them through President Truman's Marshall Plan, at some point in the 50s, I can't remember the specific year, West Germany ruled itself. It became a free nation again. A free nation, free to pursue its own sovereign aims. That is what NATO is about. That is what the United States is about. We don't conquer. We don't take. We don't put things under our thumb and oppress. That's just not what we're about. I'm not going to say we're perfect. We're not. We can all point to things that the United States has done wrong. But you've got what you can do, and then your ideals that you try and live up to. So that's kind of what I'm talking about here. Those ideals are worth defending. And when we've managed to fully live up to our ideals, those are worth remembering. Those are worth emulating. And it's worth defending. And
if I can just speak, directly to what Salty Fletch said.
He seems to be our resident Russian troll. So there you go.
I mean, and Christina, I think it's fair for Mike to respond in any way he wants to criticism. Christina's saying that, wow, your guest calls people in the chat trolls. Well, if you act like one,
if the shoe fits.
So it's an open debate, and I don't have an issue with it. But in terms of restraint, I don't think Putin has shown much restraint. I think that
no restraint.
In fact, I think he's shown that he's miscalculated. He's made huge mistakes. He thought he was going to roll into Ukraine with about 150,000 troops.
He thought his military was competent enough to do that.
Yeah, and he thought that the information war was such, I think, as well, that he was just going to scare people, and that the fear alone would probably cause the country to fold, and that there wouldn't be any support.
In 2014, he had some success at that, because those little green men that rolled into Donetsk and Crimea, and they were wearing the balaclavas, so their face weren't shown, and they had taken all the patches off of their uniforms, so that you couldn't readily identify them by the patch. When all of that went down in 2014, Russia was saying they're not ours. They must be, grassroots resistance in these portions of Ukraine, these the territories of Ukraine. And then it was a paper-thin lie, but there were enough people that bought it that it worked, because it caused uncertainty and doubt for a couple of months. I don't know if people realize that, but it only took a couple of months before Vladimir Putin himself said, yeah, those were Russian soldiers. It was paper thin, because these Russian soldiers using telephones and IPs that were Russian, and I believe the Russian nation code is +007. Don't quote me on that, but I'd like to say that's correct.
He basically created the conditions for a civil war within Ukraine.
He created uncertainty and doubt, and then rolled his troops in and occupied Ukrainian territory.
Used the unrest, the civil war itself, as justification for sending in Russian troops. Mm-hmm. So he created the problem and then provided the solution. That's what he did.
That's otherwise known as a mafia type protection racket, shall we say. Nice store here. It'd be a shame if something happened to it. Now give me $100, and you're going to have to do that every week just so your store, that's the kind of thing that we're talking about. And when
then
I
further,
say mafia rule, I am literally saying that's how they operate.
And further to the issue of restraint, if anyone has been restrained, it has been NATO. It's been the United States. It's been the West. It has been 2.5 going on 3 years, and all the weapons being given to Ukraine are being given with conditions. You can't use it for this purpose. You can't use it for that purpose. You can't strike inside Russia. You can't even attack, supply lines with munitions coming from Russia into Ukraine. You can't attack across the border until just very recently.
And I'll have you know that a lot of those, like the ones that blew up the munitions depots, were not Western weapons. Those were homegrown Ukrainian weapons.
So, I mean, if there's evidence, proof right there that the restraint has really been more on the Ukraine and Western NATO side.
Now,
absolutely.
That being said, we should, we're how far into this, and we haven't talked about NATO yet, or at least in some parts of NATO. NATO hasn't been standing still. In 2014, when all of the little green men and all the rest started happening, and I probably mentioned this before, President Obama saw this happening and looked at the state of NATO and the state of the United States military, that all the way back when the Berlin Wall fell and the Soviet Union fell, the United States did what we called a peace dividend, because we had all stupendous amounts of money in the Cold War that we were spending on our military. And you can talk about the roll-on effects. The internet that we are talking on right now was an American defense money built the first IP-based network in the late 60s. The American Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, DARPA, is who invented the internet. In 1968, and that was we're talking on that now. So when you're talking about military dollars benefiting civilians, we are literally benefiting from Cold War military defense spending from the United States right now. And so we did the peace dividend. We lowered our military. We canceled things, ongoing projects. We cut way back on other projects. Older systems that we are going to keep in service probably into the 20th century got retired. And this was NATO-wide. We cut way back. And then 9/11 happened, and we didn't really go onto a war footing. We increased our defense spending 25%. I mean, it was a significant increase, but it wasn't Cold War levels. We didn't greatly expand our military in terms of troop numbers. And so in 2014, President Obama was looking at the state of the military after 13 years of war in Afghanistan and Iraq. Speaking of American mistakes, at some point maybe we should talk about Iraq. Qualified mistake. He said, look, we cut way back in the 90s. We cut a whole bunch of modernization programs. We scrapped things that still had life in them, and now we've been fighting 13 years, and our military is starting to wear out. Things are getting tired. Not just people, but things like Humvees and helicopters and jets. There's a certain amount of flight hours that a jet is designed to do, and at some point, metal fatigue. You can't ignore physics. That at some point things just wear out. Things break, you can't fix them in some ways. So Obama just started doing a top-to-bottom review of not just the military, but also our strategic industrial base. That would be ammunition plants and tank facilities and naval ports. To a greater or lesser extent, I mean, the politics of the last 10 years have been kind of rough with obstructionism, and continuing resolutions are just murder on trying to modernize and improve your military. That's a separate topic, but There's been almost 50 continuing resolutions in the United States budget since 2014, and that has grossly impeded our ability to improve our military. And that's not even a joke. We can go into the details of that at some point, but it's cost hundreds of billions of dollars just through delay.
You know, if I can just circle back for a moment to the whole NATO expansion thing, which really it's Professor Mearsheimer who has, I think, was the father of that narrative here in the West. It is, which I bought into, you know, pretty heavily in the early stages. But now, when I sit back and I look at it, it doesn't hold. It doesn't even make sense when I really look at a map, because you could launch an attack just as easily from Estonia, which is a NATO country, as you can from Ukraine. You can launch missiles right in there. Finland's on their border now.
I was kind of getting to that. So
yeah.
After we did our top-to-bottom review, we also started looking at how NATO was operating inside of Europe. And in 2014, we were still based and operating as if it was still a Cold War. So the main defensive positions, like the Fulda Gap in the middle of Germany, the famed Cold War Fulda Gap, for any of you military people would know what I'm talking about. We had all our bases in the United Kingdom, and where I was stationed in Germany at Ramstein, Spangdahlem was just up the road. These were the main bases. They were still Cold War bases. They were still hundreds and hundreds of miles to the west of Russia. They were just not much of a threat. So we did realize that we had to redo our posture. But that's not the easiest thing in the world, because there's 30-some nations in Ukraine, and they all actually have to agree for things to happen, which is a little bit of a diplomatic task. But there was a thing in the Cold War where it was an annual exercise, and it was the idea is that if the Soviets rolled into West Germany with, you know, thousands of tanks, we had enough there to try and hold the line as well as we could for long enough to get reinforcements across the Atlantic Ocean. And so every year we ran something called the Reforger exercise, where it was simulating. We had pre-positioned gear, so there were tanks that were held in storage, tanks and other equipment that were held in storage, ready to roll on like a 24-hour notice. And then there were plans in place for troops inside the United States that when the call came up, they would pack their bags and they would be on a plane inside of 24 hours, and they would land inside of Europe within 48 hours. They would join up with their tanks and roll on to fight. So the idea is that every year we practiced for a 48-hour, the people there had to hold for 48 hours before the reinforcements arrived, at least the first wave of reinforcements. And then there was also the merchant ship, the slow roll across the Atlantic that takes a lot more than 48 hours. So the Reforger exercises, when the Cold War stopped, we stopped doing the Reforger exercises. After 2014, we started redoing that, because one of the things about NATO, and one of the reasons why it is difficult to join NATO, is there's something called Article 5 in NATO is the famous one. That is, if a NATO nation is attacked, they can activate Article 5 and NATO goes to war. What is less famous is Article 3, and that is, I'm going to directly quote it here, laid the foundation for the cooperation and military preparedness between the Allies. In order to more effectively achieve the objectives of this treaty, the parties, separately and jointly by means of continuous and effective self-help, mutual aid, will maintain and develop their individual and collective capacity to resist an armed attack. What that did is that it set a framework for what we called standardization agreements. And when I mentioned, you know, the French and the Brits and the Belgians and the Polish and the rest of the people had to work together to liberate France, that's what I'm talking about, standardization agreements. And it's more than just sidearm ammunition is 9mm by 45 or whatever it is, 5.56 for the standard assault rifle round. 155 millimeter for the standard artillery round. It's the NATO standard. But it's also things like the size of the refueling hose for a jet aircraft. It's the standard radio call signs, the 9 line for a medevac. Anybody that's been in the American or NATO military has probably had to practice a 9 line. The whole phonetic alphabet, the Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo, Foxtrot, that's the NATO standard phonetic alphabet for radio communications. And that had to be agreed to. Funny enough, American police use a different one, so American military veterans actually have to learn a new one, and the other police laugh at them when they screw up. So it's all these things that we realized, and it's more than that. So there's something called a joint doctrine, which has its specific, STANAG is what they're calling about. STANAG 2437 is the Allied Joint Doctrine that lays out all sorts of things. And what it includes is command structure, ethical standards, and expected responsibility at different ranks. So if you are a sergeant in the American military and you're talking to the same level of sergeant in the British military or the Estonian military, you are going to be able to have a horizontal conversation between equals. You can expect the other person at the same rank to have very, very similar responsibilities to what you have. But we realized that had kind of gone beyond the wayside because we hadn't really had joint exercises. We hadn't had these militaries working together in almost 20 years. And so right now, one of the things that's happening is there is a joint NATO command defensive posture inside of Latvia that's under Canadian command. It's a NATO joint force. It exists to defend Latvia, but in case something goes sideways, but it also exists to get NATO back where it needed to be an effective defensive treaty. Because this Canadian command in Latvia has Canadians and Americans and obviously Latvians, Germans. I believe the Germans have a medical team with that group, but don't quote me. Just everybody working together and figuring out how this actually does work. Because we had forgotten. We had Reforger-like exercises happening again. And we basically had to knock the rust off of everything from the Cold War because Russia decided that they wanted to attack Ukraine and go in hard and start to play stupid games, and we had to be ready to give them stupid prizes if we had to.
So today we're seeing NATO. There's a report out today. I think CBC is actually the story breaking it in Canada. NATO telling Canada, and I think other NATO countries as well, to prepare for a conventional war with Russia. How much... On the surface, that sets off alarm bells, but at the same time, I think the message there is we better be prepared, and by preparing, that helps guarantee or helps preserve peace. Is that fair?
So, in order to be a credible defensive treaty, you actually have to have credibility. For somebody to think twice about attacking NATO, you have to actually give them reason to think twice. So, yeah, you got to be ready. And you can't fool around. It's funny, every president, a United States president in the 21st century, because we had the Cold War and the peace dividend and everybody's defense budgets dropped through the floor. For real reasons. We had real hope that, hey, the Cold War's over. We had real hope that we could, have a different life going forward. It turns out that's not true. And so we had to reform and rebuild. It's funny that every president, President Bush, President Obama, President Trump, and President Biden have all told the other NATO nations, look, that 2% of your GDP that you promised in a treaty framework that you were going to devote to defense spending, that needs to happen. Trump was more public and more of a jerk about it, but he wasn't really saying anything that President Obama or President Bush hadn't said before him, and President Biden hasn't said after him. So that's a real thing. They are treaty obligations in the United States. When you sign a treaty, it becomes U.S. law. If the United States spent less than 2% of our gross domestic product on our military, we'd literally be breaking U.S. law. Somebody would go to jail if we tried to do that. It would be a real problem. So hopefully the other NATO nations, because there's ethical standards and legal standards to join NATO that you need to reach, in addition to like the rank structure and the authority and all that kind of stuff, there's ethical standards in terms of how people are expected to act, and that includes in the diplomatic and legal realm. So yeah, that 2% is a real deal. Now I have to say that since 2022, before Russia invaded in February 2022 in their big invasion, only 6 NATO nations were over 2%. The United States was one of them, but when you're talking about 6 out of 30 plus, that's not all that great, you know? That's not a NATO treaty that is holding together. In fact, it was a sign that NATO is starting to fall apart. Since February 2022, we are up to, I'd like to say, 23 nations above 2% and more growing. And I will read you the nations that are still below 2%. I might give Slovakia a pass. They're at 1.99. Croatia at 1.81. Portugal at 1.55. Italy at 1.49. Canada at 1.37. Belgium at 1.3. Luxembourg at 1.29. Slovenia at 1.29, and Spain at 1.28. So, good job, Canada. Mm-hmm. You guys need to do better, and I'm not joking around about that. There has been movement in Canada. I don't know why you guys are so slow about this, but there's been a recent push for brand new submarines. I'd like to say 12 of them that the Canadian government. This is a direct quote from Defense News, which is a reputable site for military news. Canadian government has requested submarine builders submit information on any of their boats, submarines that they build by November 18th in the first step towards an eventual purchase. The Germans and I believe the Danes and the Swedes, I might be missing some, but there's several nations, NATO nations, that build conventionally powered, what by that I mean a diesel on the surface and electricity underwater. There's been a new thing, it's an old thing, but the tech got a lot better very recently, called air-independent propulsion, where the diesel electric sub can operate almost like a nuclear sub, where it can stay submerged for extended amounts of time, weeks, as opposed to as long as your battery's held out, which was the old model on the diesel electric sub, and that might only be 24 hours if you don't push your batteries that hard. And then you have to surface to run the diesel engines and recharge your batteries. So the air-independent propulsion gives significant capabilities to a non-nuclear powered submarine.
While we're talking about vessels and things at sea, just this week, and also related to restraint, Russia fired on a fishing vessel, a Norwegian fishing vessel, which would technically be a NATO vessel in Norwegian waters.
It's a civilian vessel of a NATO nation, yes.
Right.
Sorry, I'm being hyper specific, but it matters for legalities.
Yes, and this on top of some, we'll give Russia the benefit of the doubt and call them wayward drones that have
crossed into Polish and Latvian and Romanian airspace.
Romania, yep.
And Moldova, but mainly Romania, Poland, and Latvia.
Oh yeah, but he's exercising extreme restraint. No, he's pushing buttons and seeing how far he can go, and then when there's any kind of response, the propaganda machine cranks up again, and it's all our fault. No, it's not.
There's a couple of things that are happening now, or that have already been put into place, where you were talking about, Russia's threatening nuclear war at the start of the show. And yeah, nobody wants that. So you were relatively fearful about that, and I get it. But then how do you respond to that is important. And same with the journalism. You have to protect what's important to you. And you have to be willing to stand up to bullies and people that are threatening you. If what you have, what you believe, what you do, what you belong to matters to you, then it should be worth defending in various ways. So being prepared is one of the ways that we should do that. We don't want war, but if it comes, we need to be ready to end it. And I'm not joking about that. If Russia wants to play games, we'll play games, and Russia won't like how that turns out.
And I don't like it, frankly, and this is me editorializing. I don't like being threatened. I don't like my family being threatened. And
I don't know.
I'm not going to stand for that.
I don't know if you were aware, but the 1983 Geneva Conventions, Russia threatening the use of nuclear weapons is actually a war crime. It's not one of the more serious ones, but you can see why it's considered a war crime, is that it creates fear. And they are trying to create fear and coerce people through fear into losing their ideals, or to give Russia a pass on what they've been doing. And there's a reason for that. There's a reason to push back. So one of the ways that we've been pushing back is we've tried to do some what they call preemptive facts. Before Russia invaded in February of 22, the United States, in a historically unprecedented continual move, is they started broadcasting what our intelligence services had found out, that, Russia's getting ready. They're positioning for a real attack. And there was months and months of America preemptively putting this out. This is not just an exercise. This is not what you do when it's just an exercise. We run exercises, and this is not it. And so one of the things that it's still kind of a little bit under wraps. There was rumors of this 2 years ago when Russia first started making the biggest nuclear saber rattlings. And Poland, just in the last couple of months, there was a Polish minister that possibly spoke out of turn. Hopefully he didn't get in too much trouble about that, but it also could have been a deliberate, I can't pronounce your name. I'm so sorry.
Markowicz,
the former Polish citizen under Soviet oppression. This is not the first time I've heard that. So what the Polish minister leaked in a press conference is that the West, led by the United States, had told Russia directly and Vladimir Putin directly, if you let a nuke off the chain, we're going to go after you hard, because radiation and fallout do not know about national borders. If you pop a nuke inside Ukraine, I don't know how many people are aware of the history of Chernobyl after the event, in the decades after the event. But the effects of the Chernobyl nuclear plant meltdown in mid-'80s, I'd like to say 86, but don't quote me on that, mid-'80s, are still being felt. You can still measure the radiation levels and the fallout levels. And there was I don't know if it's still operational, but there was a thing where children in Ukraine and Belarus and eastern Poland and parts of Latvia, so they did not have to live the entire year inside of a fallout zone from the 80s. They were sent to places like Germany and France and the United Kingdom to live at least part of the year outside of a nuclear fallout zone. So yes, we take this seriously because it's serious. When you pop a nuke, that's going to be with you for a while, and it's going to be killing innocent people for a while, and it's going to affect children that are not yet born for decades. So yeah, you let a nuke off the chain, that's serious business. That threatens the lives of NATO citizens, some of them not born, like I said. And the pushback was, if you pop a nuke, we are coming in hard, and we will destroy your conventional forces with our conventional forces. The Russian military will cease to exist, was the message given to Russia.
And Timmy Monty bought into something that even I accepted.
He didn't even
to
spell
some
it right.
degree.
Good job.
The Avaz.
I'm wondering if Timmy Monty is not a native English speaker. That looks like a not native English speaker typo. Good job.
Yeah, so the whole Azov Nazi argument is an exaggeration.
Or
at
Avaz, as
best.
Timmy put it.
Yeah. Ding dong, Avaz calling.
Yeah. Yeah, so I don't know if people are necessarily aware that the Nazis actually co-opted a lot of these symbols, the Wolfsangel. The swastika was actually there's something when you put your national insignia on a plane, it's called a roundel. I don't know why it's called a roundel. I'd have to look that up. It's probably French, and who can discern the French. But the roundel on the Finnish Air Force planes, before the Nazis it was still the Weimar Republic. The Finnish planes had swastikas on there. The swastika is in India. So the Nazis co-opted a lot of these symbols. Now, was it wise for some of those original Azov Brigade people to be using these symbols? Probably not. And there's Nazis in America, Charlottesville.
And more Nazis in the Russian military today than far more than you're ever going to find in the Ukrainian military. I've shown that. I showed that the last time you were on the program, actually, Mike.
But when the Azov Brigade that started out as a militia, for lack of a better term, it was a civilian militia. When it was absorbed into the Ukrainian military, they had to give that up, and a lot of the leaders got fired or demoted. They really had to clean up their act. And now it's one of the most effective Ukrainian units. So yeah, they had sketchy origins, but I'm going to defend them. Not going to defend Nazis. If you're a Nazi, you can go, well, I'd be using, harsher language than I've used on this show before.
Yeah.
I'd go all Captain America and punch a Nazi,
So how concerned do you think we should be at this point when Putin says if Russia is attacked with these weapons that and we're seeing NATO saying, let's get ready for a conventional war, and things are escalating. There's no doubt about that.
Well, I will point out that the West, led by the United States, back since 2014, realized that we had to, we could no longer live on our post-Cold War peace dividend, and we had to rebuild to maintain a credible conventional deterrence. And we've been trying to build that for 10 years. It's been accelerated the last 3 years. And a lot of NATO has come along. Even Canada. Your GDP thing is low, but there's been movement in the right direction. And Canada has given a lot of aid to Ukraine. So I might make fun of you, but legit props where they're due. But we've been building a conventional deterrence. A lot of this is under the radar, and we are. I don't know if you're ever ready. You're never really ready, but we're more ready now than we were 3 years ago. Certainly than we were 10 years ago. And I don't think Russia wants that game. Now, Russia has laid all of these red lines out over the past 2.5 years. And people worried about them. They're like, oh, what would Russia do? And so it's one of those, let's not worry what Russia does. Let's do what we need to do, because we can't help what Russia does. We need to do what we need to do. And So there's been all of these red lines that Russia put down, and then something happened, like Abrams tanks, Challenger tanks, Leopard 2 tanks. That was one of those red lines. And then Russia didn't do anything. So how seriously, that's going to be debatable. I think it was a real thing when President Zelensky brought to the United Nations this week credible information that Russia was planning to target some of the remaining nuclear plants under Ukrainian control. That is a real threat. They went in hard for the Zaporizhia nuclear plant in ways that were criminal. It's not inherently criminal to capture a nuclear power plant. How you do it is what would determine whether it's criminal or not. And so when they were shooting tank rounds at the reactor vessels, that was a crime. So they've demonstrated they're at least stupid enough, or their soldiers are stupid enough to go after a nuclear power plant in ways that are not okay. But the credible information that Zelensky gave this week was a different category. That would be a consciously decided action from the Kremlin to go after nuclear power plants. And did I mention that we're still dealing with fallout from the Chernobyl meltdown? So that's what we're talking about, is 3 new Chernobyls.
Which says to me that these allegations from Russia suggesting that Ukraine has attacked the plants in sort of false flag operations and things like this, it just defies logic. It makes no sense. Ukraine, I can't imagine Ukraine doing something like that to a nuclear plant within territory. To destroy that
makes
entire
exactly
area.
No sense. Yeah,
0 sense.
There's a Russia used to be our friends comment. Used to be our allies. Sorry. Sorry if Russia used to be our allies. I misquoted you the first time. Apologies. That's overstating it. Enemy of my enemy would be a good category. I don't know if people are aware, but after 9/11, some of the nations that helped the United States go after Al Qaeda and Osama bin Laden included Russia, Iran, and Iraq, and the Syrians. Those are not necessarily nations that we would agree with. The Pakistanis are kind of frenemies. But Russia has never been more, Russia, the Soviet Union, has never really been more than enemy of my enemy. I wouldn't necessarily call them friends or allies. That would be stretching the truth. Just as a point of order.
Yeah. Well, someone in the comments in the chat said, Rick, what happened to you? Nothing, really, except that I've just been watching what's been going on over the last couple of years. I bought into some of this Mearsheimer stuff in the beginning, and some of the Ritter stuff too, because I thought he was a credible source, and that had a real impact and influence on me during the early stages of this. But I can only listen to somebody say that this thing is going to be over in a week so many times over the course of 2.5 or 3 years, and then I begin to realize that they're just freaking lying.
Or you can see the video and documented pictures of Bucha.
Yes.
I thought it's hard to believe this was already 2 years ago, because they liberated Izium approximately 2 years ago. A friend of mine was part of the first tanks out of Chernihiv, legendary unit at this point. And he was the breakthrough unit that helped liberate Izium, and he was one of the first to discover one of the several mass graves. There's at least 4. My information on the Izium massacre and war crimes is out of date, so there's probably more by now. But one of the things that hit me hard is they dug up one of the victims that was wearing a very unique bracelet. The corpse was. And somebody, because we live in this digital age, somebody was able to find an online picture of that person when they were alive wearing that same bracelet. It was one of the things that really hit me in the gut. That you can't see that. Somebody was like, man, you're so full of hate, Mike. No, I'm really not. I hate the actions. I'm willing to defend what I believe in. And I served 22 years in the military, so that gives you a level of my willingness to defend what I believe in. You can't look at that and not say, this needs to be stopped, this needs to be opposed, this needs to be pushed back on, this needs to be whatever, you feel that you need to do. And dealing with politics, Rick, you're a conservative. I really miss conservatives like Ronald Reagan, who said Russia's an evil empire. There was one of your commenters was talking about living in communist Poland. I've been to Poland a couple of times in the last 10 years, and yeah, they don't want to go back. They're doing a pretty decent job of becoming a Western nation. Just as a small tangent, that the nation that is spending the highest percentage of their GDP on defense is not the United States. The United States is at 3.37 for fiscal year 24. Poland is at 4.12. Poland doesn't want to go back. They know what it's like. They experienced oppression and war crimes for so long. They don't want to go back. And they're making sure that they're going to be ready this time. If something goes sideways, they're going to be competent.
In fact, we're seeing Poland, President Duda this week saying that if Russia does anything to a nuclear plant inside Ukraine, he'll send Polish troops in.
They're right there.
Yeah.
They're literally across the border. And Poland was part of that get the children out of the fallout zone agreement. Mm-hmm. They know, they've been living with it. You don't let a nuke off the chain. You just don't do that. Yeah. And if there's a line that Russia can't cross, that's it. So when you're talking about red lines, we mean it. I don't know how you could let Russia pop a nuke and not respond in overwhelming force. I don't see any other option there. And Putin's got to know that. So how much of this threat is serious and how much of it is he just trying to cause people to be fearful and act stupidly out of fear? Because when you're scared, it's a lot easier to be stupid when you're scared.
And I'm gonna make reference to that fear as we wrap up here tonight at the very end, but I'm interested in any final thoughts you might have tonight, Mike.
I had some other Canadian things pulled up.
Sure.
I don't remember what I was going to do. It is, I don't know if this is really wrap up, but it is worth pointing out that in terms of NATO, the United States is a bit more than half of the economic power of NATO. It's roughly 50-50 between the United States and the rest of the NATO nations. And it makes sense. The United States is the biggest economy in the world, and we're bigger than China. We thought China might have passed us by now, and they haven't. China's got some problems right now economically. And so Canada is an important, valued member of NATO. Canada had their own beach. I'd like to say it was Juno on D-Day. Canada has a very solid history of honorable military service, honorable military action. but Canada's GDP is roughly $2 trillion US dollars. To put that in comparison, California, one of our 50 states, it's our biggest state, but is 3.6 trillion. So Canada is less than 2/3 of California. Just to put it in perspective. So it's one of those, we don't expect you to be a world superpower. But the NATO standards that we talk about that are designed for all of these diverse nations to be able to work together militarily, that matters. That helps everybody. The Canadians don't need to spend all of that money developing a new air-to-air missile. They can use the British Meteor or the American AMRAAM. There's a couple other nations that have some decent missiles. And when you're talking about standardization agreements, the Meteor and the AMRAAM actually use the same launcher because of the standardization agreement. Where they fit on the aircraft, if it can fit an AMRAAM, it should be able to fit a Meteor. That's how NATO works. So you don't need to do all of it yourself. That's part of why NATO's a good thing. And the rest of NATO has your back. That's part of what NATO makes NATO work. But Canada actually does have to pull its part. And it's been getting better. Like I said, that the attempt to buy new submarines is important because both China and Russia are making moves into the Arctic. And Canada has a lot of shoreline in the Arctic. It's kind of important to Canada as a nation and to your sovereign rights as a nation. And part of that submarine deal was making sure they are under ice capable. There's various other things that are going on. Even in terms of air defense, you're not acting alone. Canada's never acted alone. They're part of, it's a joint NATO command called NORAD, North American Air Defense, I believe is what it stands for. And it's a network of gigantic, very powerful, very competent radars that are spread out all over the place. Canada, Alaska, but there's also some in the continental United States as well. Yeah, you need to do better, but you're not acting alone. And so it's important to understand that you're not alone. You're part of many nations that are trying to pull for the same thing. And NATO's worth defending. Freedom's worth defending. Freedom of the press is worth defending.
Yep.
Our ideals are worth defending. But it's one of those things that I don't want to sound bloodthirsty because I'm not. The ideal that I like in the West and in America goes all the way back. It's symbolized in the United States, the seal of the United States, where we have an eagle, and in one talon it's grasping the olive branch of peace, and the other talon it's got a ton of arrows. But the head is always towards the olive branch. We want peace. That's what we want. We don't want to be fighting. As a military member, the last thing I wanted was a fight, because guess who is in danger first if anything goes sideways? But we have to be prepared. What we have, what we believe in, is worth defending. And we have to remember that in the face of fear and in the face of coercion and in the face of all these attempts to create chaos and uncertainty in what we believe in. We actually have to remember what we believe in is worth something, and it's worth standing up for.
And these are my final thoughts for tonight, folks. It was a scary day because of all this talk about NATO suggesting allied countries prepare for war. It's a scary day because we see Vladimir Putin again ramping up the rhetoric, threatening to nuke us. But this brings me back to even the Freedom Convoy, where we were coerced, we were locked down, we were masked up, we were in some cases forced to get a thing in the arm that we didn't necessarily want, and a lot of people had issues with the coercion behind all of that, me included, and I didn't like it. I still don't like the authoritarianism that comes with that. And what I see going on here today is very much in alignment with that. And so, with that being said, I just say to you all out there in the Maverick family tonight in our community that the time is coming when you're going to have to pick a side. I think we're already kind of there. And I'm alarmed to see so many people siding with the authoritarian who's threatening to nuke us. Well, my message directly to Vladimir Putin tonight is simply this. You threaten to nuke me, you threaten my country, you threaten my community, my country, my family. My message is quite simple, sir. I will not comply.
This has been a Maverick Multimedia production.